we shouldn't see the government's job as to protect us from ourselves. Their job is to allow us to live in liberty and minimize the harm that can be done to us by the government itself. Right now, it seems like the government is coming along and repeatedly kicking you in the nuts and expecting you to say thank you for doing that, because right now they're causing more harm than good.
That's right. Right. It could have been worse. You could have had your nuts cut off. Aren't you grateful? I'm protecting you.
Faith, firearms, and freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 217, and we're joined once again by our unindicted co-conspirator, John Bennett, the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm not dead yet, so I guess there's that.
There is that. We can all count our blessings.
That's right.
All right. Well, today we are, as you may recall, back in episode 212 and 213, we discussed the government responses to the coronavirus pandemic. A lot has happened in the intervening weeks. I can't believe it's been 5 weeks since we recorded that episode or those episodes. We thought what we'd do today is sort of revisit some of those policies since a lot has changed, and see what the effect has been, and see if our opinions of some of those policies have changed. But first, let's give a shout out to the awesome men and women who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener funded, and that means that we rely on the contributions of the amazing people like Robert and Frank and Catherine and Eric and Kurt and the disreputable Bartlett, among many others, for whom I am eternally grateful, who make this show possible every week. Since we're all self-isolating and we're forced to sit around and do not a whole lot during the pandemic, now is the perfect time to curl up with a good podcast like Armed Lutheran Radio. So what better time than now to join the Reformation Gun Club and support this podcast and enjoy access to all of the hundreds of hours of exclusive content that we have available for members. Even $1 a month goes a long way to help us pay for podcast hosting and for software and other services that we need to keep the show going. So if you'd be interested in supporting us, we certainly would appreciate it. Check it all out at armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes, or go to the menu at the website, armedlutheran.us. Look for Reformation Gun Club there at the top. All right, so today I guess we'll call Coronapalooza Part 3. We're revisiting the government responses to the COVID-19 pandemic we discussed back in episodes 212 and 213, when all of this sort of first got ramped up. Some of those policies have turned out very differently from the way we discussed them, and they are now on steroids. The idea behind those original episodes was to sort of judge those policies, the policies of government at all levels and our elected leaders, based on one principle, and that was the second great commandment, love of neighbor. Does that policy show love for the citizen, for our neighbor? Are they good policies? How should we as Christians judge the intent and the effectiveness of those policies? And like I said, a lot has changed in the intervening 5 weeks. So let's dig back into some of those policies. The first that we addressed was the closure of public schools, which now has, I don't know what's going on in Minnesota. Here in Texas, they've just this last week, the governor announced that schools will not start back up this year, or at least this academic year. And we were both at the time somewhat skeptical based on data. We weren't sure whether this was a good idea to disrupt the school system, the education system, the lives of American families. How do you see things now based on what we know at this time?
Just looking at it from a strategic perspective, my wife, she's a teacher, and they have a month left of school. So by the time that things are supposed to be alleviated here, where things can start to go back to normal, which the date that is set tentatively right now is May 4th. At that point, there would be 3 weeks left of school.
Right.
Good luck getting all the kids back in school and back on a schedule when they've had, free reign of the home. I mean, I feel bad for parents, because I'm sure there's some parents out there that are realizing that their child's teacher was absolutely right about their behavioral problems. It's
there's a newfound respect for teachers.
Yes. So from that perspective, yes, it's probably the best thing to do right now is to discontinue school for the rest of the school year.
Yeah.
And by discontinue school, I mean not getting together in the classroom. But one of the things that I find terribly troubling is that it seems that there is a lot of good data that's being ignored by our elected leaders. That there seems to be a great deal of ego that has played into this, that so many governors told their people the sky is falling and we have to take drastic measures or we're all going to die. And now they're realizing, it's not going to be that bad. But they have to protect their ego for the decisions that they made that are life altering for the people in their state. The one piece of data that I think is very promising and should give people a lot of optimism with all of this is the study that came out of Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara out in California, which would have been, I believe, Wednesday, that they did some random testing, both antibodies testing and testing for the active virus. And based on their testing, at that time, they only had 1,000 confirmed cases. They found out based on their random testing that the actual number of infections was anywhere between 45,000 and 81,000.
Wow.
So the actual number of the infected is significantly higher, which means the death rate is significantly lower, which also means that based on this data, that there's a 99% chance if you have the virus that you're not even going to feel sick. So it's time to open things back up and let America get back to living.
Yes, agreed. And to bring it back to schools and kids, part of what I think, where I saw a study on this, it was an independent analysis of the data which related specifically to the different responses that different government agencies or different states and different localities have applied, whether it was closing schools or whether it was locking down or stay-home orders or whatever, closing businesses. The one approach that had any statistically significant impact on transmission rates was closing schools. Because what you have is, like you were talking about, you've got people who are asymptomatic, so you've got more people who have it and don't know it. They go to school, the kids, especially at the lower grade levels, there's just no way to convince them to socially distance. They're back with the same kids all the time, so you're not just transiently passing people in a store. You're going back to this same group of kids over and over and over again, and then coming home to elderly parents or grandparents or young siblings who may actually be vulnerable, and bringing those germs back and potentially harming, not necessarily harming the kids at school, but bringing the germs back to somebody at home.
Right.
So this is probably the one policy that made any difference at all in terms of transmission.
Are you sure that releasing criminals didn't have a greater impact?
Oh, that was probably. Oh, that's true. That was probably awesome. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one was a ban on large gatherings of 50 people or more, closing down concerts and sporting events and political rallies and parades. And I think that policy initially made sense given what we thought we knew at the time. The idea of having people crowded in and packed in small spaces together, indoor theaters and arenas, probably not a good idea given how this thing is transmitted from one person to the next. But that since morphed into banning gatherings of 10 people or more, or then it was 5 people or more, and then it was more than one person who are not the members of the same family.
Yeah, my sister, one of my sisters, lives in Santa Ana, California, and the police were, and I believe this was under the direction of the mayor, they were going to begin arresting anyone they found gathering with anyone who wasn't a member of their household. So you couldn't go over to Grandma and Grandpa's house without risking getting arrested.
Once you give government a little bit of power, right? You give them an inch, they take a foot, and they take away your ability to gather with any number of people.
Right.
And the policies then become wildly inconsistent and illogical, and you start ending up with people not able to gather in church, but you can still go to the grocery store and stand in line next to somebody and jostle shoppers fighting over toilet paper. You can't go to the park out in the open air. It doesn't make any sense the way this thing has played itself out. And now you're starting to see people getting fed up. And
Right.
States like Michigan, people are coming out and saying, no, we're tired of this. And things have got to change.
Right. Mississippi, you talked about people getting cracked down on with just these ridiculous fines. That there was a church that had a drive-in church service. People were there with their windows rolled up, listening on from an FM broadcast that the pastor was doing, and the sheriffs came along and fined every single person that was parked there.
Yep.
The whole world has lost its mind, it seems.
I'm really not as shocked that so many, like I mentioned in my commentary from last week's show, was about how this pandemic has really revealed all the petty tyrants that we have elected at various levels of government.
Yes.
And I'm not really surprised by that. What I'm surprised by is what you just mentioned, is how many people are so scared of the potential of their own mortality that they would gladly forego their liberties just because they're scared of getting sick.
Right. It frightens me because I would have never believed that so many people in our country would be so willing to surrender their liberty. There is a guy named Benjamin Franklin who said something along the lines that those who would surrender liberty for the sake of security deserve neither. And, it's not helping when we have millions of people who say, you're going to kill us all if you go about living your daily life. You need to pull your head out of the sand and realize that this is not freedom that we were living in at this moment in time. This is no longer a free country when we surrender our liberties in this way.
And there's not a minute of your life that's guaranteed to you.
Right.
You can lock yourself away and hide from this virus all you want and come out tomorrow and get hit by a bus. You could come out, a year from now and still get the virus because this thing's not going to go away. You don't hide from viruses.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
And you have people who are saying, well, and governors saying, well, we're not going to open things up until there's a vaccine. Here's the problem. Respiratory viruses are extremely difficult to develop a vaccine for.
Which is why so many people die from the flu every year.
Yes. Which is why there has never been a vaccine for tuberculosis.
Or the common cold.
So it's mind-boggling because I have to ask myself, with so many people sitting at home, how many of these people are going to eat more food than they should, eat more unhealthy food that they should, and 10 years from now are going to die from obesity and heart disease because they decided that, you know what, I'm going to do exactly what the authorities say that I should do, and I'm going to lock myself away at home for the next 6 months.
Yep.
Yeah, you dodged the coronavirus, but you did not dodge that massive coronary heart disease, did you?
Yep. Now the when we first recorded back in episode what was going to be episode 212 and turned into 212 213 was these policies that were forcing the closures of businesses like restaurants and bars and gyms and doctors' offices and barbershops, for example, and that now has spread all across the country. I think there are 5 states that don't have full lockdowns: Arkansas and Iowa, the Dakotas, and Nebraska don't have any kind of stay-at-home or lockdown orders. We took these data models, and everybody has probably seen them by now. That flatten the curve data graph, and then you're trying to compare. It's like, look, we're trying to flatten the curve. We don't want all these deaths to happen at once. We're trying to keep from overwhelming our healthcare system, right? Everybody should stay home, so we flatten the curve. The first mistake that people made was to assume that meant that by flattening the curve, we were saving lives. That was never the intention of flattening the curve. Flattening the curve was simply to spread the same number of deaths out over a longer period. But that was also a terrible model because it didn't take into account the differences in different parts of the country. So we then immediately, all across the country, with the exception of those 5 states that I mentioned, we applied sort of this one-size-fits-all approach to how do we handle this, and that has been to shut down businesses, and it's had absolutely disastrous effects on our economy. We are now at 26 million people who have filed for unemployment in the last 5 weeks. That is staggering.
That's unsustainable.
At the same time, we have people that we have these poor people who are saying, I've got to get back to work because I've got to feed my family. I'm scared to death. My kids are going to we're going to go hungry. And at the same time, you have people saying, oh, well, you just care more about money than you do about saving lives. I cannot believe that is even an argument.
Right.
That people can't see that the jobs that are being lost, the businesses that are being closed, we have in our minds, in some sectors of this country, an idea that business means like corporations, and corporations are evil, and it's all about profits. But we seem to lose sight of the fact the majority of the jobs in this country are created by small businesses.
Yes.
And those small businesses, those jobs, all the everyday people you see out in stores and in retail and in the service sector, those people have lives, and they have the money that they care about pays for their homes. It feeds their kids. It puts clothes on their kids. It keeps them fed, and it keeps the lights on. And some people are so scared of this stupid virus that they seem to think that that's not important, that taking care of those people's families is not important, and that they should just shut up and stay home and suck it up. And that just absolutely drives me crazy.
Yes, and it's even more infuriating when that's the kind of rhetoric that we get from people either in the entertainment industry or in the mainstream media industry, where these are people who have more wealth than either you or I could ever possibly imagine to receive in our lifetimes. And yet they are denigrating people who are getting ticked off because they want to go back to work so they can provide for their families. I hate to break it to your average liberal in Hollywood or in the media, in the news media industry, but your average American isn't the kind of person who is content to sit on their rear and receive a government check. That these are hardworking Americans who take a lot of pride in being able to work for a living. And to even tell them that, oh, you could just stay home and watch Netflix and receive your unemployment check. It's a incredible insult to say that to those who work for a living.
Well, here I pulled up some statistics, and I wanted to share some of it because I think it's illustrative of just how stupid our approach has been. I was looking at the case fatality rate. So basically, the number of known cases compared to the number who have actually died, right? Nationally, it's 5%. That sounds terrible, but that's probably wildly inaccurate, like you were saying earlier, because we are finding out, like with that Santa Clara study, and we just found out, I think this week, Governor Cuomo announced in New York that 13% of New Yorkers have the antibodies, and they didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
So 5% of the people, of the cases that we know about, that number is probably off by a factor of 10.
I believe it's by a factor of 50 or more, to be honest.
Instead of 5% case fatality, it's probably under 1% at this point.
Yes.
And the rates are crazy different geographically. So because we don't know what the actual case fatality rates are, I have to look at just what we know. So based on the known cases, New York State, for example, is nuts. 7%. In New York City, it's 10%. In California, huge state, only 3%.
Yeah.
Texas, 3%. So population density is what matters.
Right. In New York City, they are piled on top of each other like sardines in a can.
Yes.
You look at a city like Los Angeles, that's my home city.
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles is a massive space of land. It is well spread out. There is plenty of open space.
If you look at the idea of locking people down and saying stay at home, yeah, New York City makes sense. But somewhere like North Texas or the rural parts of California or Minnesota or Nebraska or that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it doesn't. Not a bit.
There's absolutely no evidence that lockdowns work. The 5 states that I mentioned earlier that have no lockdowns and no stay-at-home orders, Arkansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and the Dakotas, combined, they have less than 200 deaths. They have a combined case fatality rate of under 2%. And yet those people are out walking around and they're not locked down and their businesses aren't shuttered. Of those 5, Iowa has a 2.4% rate and South Dakota is less than half of 1%.
And yet here in Minnesota, we're going to completely ignore what's happening in South Dakota and go along with the crazy governor of Michigan instead.
Exactly. And Michigan makes sense in Wayne County in Detroit, but not all of Michigan.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that we, like you said, that we ignore it or we treat it flippantly or we wave it off like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just the flu, because obviously it's not just the flu.
Right.
So, but there are other factors that we're not taking into account, and we're applying this sort of blanket Band-Aid to everybody instead of focusing on the people who are most at risk. And that's, as it turns out, once you hit 55, and if you have other medical conditions, that's where your risk goes through the roof. The majority of the deaths in this country are over 55 and people who have other pre-existing conditions. There was a study I saw just this week out of New York. 94% of those hospitalized with COVID-19, 94% had, get this, more than one disease other than coronavirus.
Wow.
Not just coronavirus plus one other thing, more than one. So
wow.
if you're under 55 and healthy, your chance of dying from this stuff is practically nil. It doesn't mean it's nil. It doesn't mean that you should just go, lick doorknobs. It means
or
that,
airplane toilets, as was the case with some videos.
So, so things like you were talking about earlier, like obesity, like diabetes, poverty plays into this, age. Those things play a factor, and we're not taking those things into account, and we're applying these remedies to everyone. And I think that's and we're having these things forced upon us by people who are not having to pay the same price.
One thing, just for a little bit of comic relief in this, is that I found it incredibly amusing that liberals in California are finally discovering that there is an actual waiting period when you go to try and buy a gun, that you can't just walk into a store and walk out the same day with an AR-15. It's
right. Or an AR-14.
Or I almost said AR-14 just to give some laughs there, but
oh my goodness. Yep. So this doesn't mean that we're advocating that all this stuff it's time to end this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in New York City, maybe not in Wayne County in Michigan, maybe not in the hot spots. But the rest of the country, it's time to stop. It's time to get back to life.
Right.
That doesn't mean that it also doesn't mean that we're just saying flip a switch and everything goes back to normal immediately, and that we're all like crawling on top of each other again and not being smart about it.
Yeah, it's going to take time for life to go back to the way it was 3 months ago,
Yeah.
But we have to reach the point where, first of all, I want to backtrack just a little bit. The whole point of flattening the curve, as you said, was not to overwhelm the medical system. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't to prevent anyone from dying. Guess what? You're not going to magically be free of getting the virus because we've quote unquote flattened the curve. There's a good chance you're still going to get it. The whole point was so that the medical industry could be better prepared to meet that challenge, could stockpile respirators, could stockpile the necessary medications. So we've reached that point. We have to get back to living. Those that are at high risk, hey, it's a good idea to maybe stay home if you can financially, feasibly do that. Most of the people who are in the at-risk categories, the elderly, many of these people are already retired. And so, rely on your younger relatives to care for you. That's why I do the grocery shopping for my in-laws, so that they don't have to place themselves at risk for this. But for the rest of us, at this point, we have to reach the mindset where we say, if I get the virus, whatever, there's treatments available. We need to get back to life as it was. This isn't living. It's not.
No. I think that what we've unfortunately allowed our elected leaders to do is to assume that we're not to be trusted with liberty. We can't be trusted to be responsible. But I think that the whole concept of our constitutional liberties is the idea that we are, because the government derives their power from us and not the other way around, that we are responsible citizens who can make good decisions for our own lives. And so, yes, there are going to be some who do stupid things, and that's always going to be the case. We see that all the time when we talk about the gun debate. But there are also millions and millions and millions of honest, hardworking Americans who make very good decisions every day, and they were doing it before the government officials were forcing them to do it.
Right.
You can trust the American people to make responsible decisions about staying safe and healthy without forcing them to do it.
Yeah, the purpose of government isn't to prevent us from taking risks that could potentially have negative consequences. If that were the case, then they would outlaw driving immediately. But we shouldn't see the government's job as to protect us from ourselves. Their job is to allow us to live in liberty and minimize the harm that can be done to us by the government itself. Right now, it seems like the government is coming along and repeatedly kicking you in the nuts and expecting you to say thank you for doing that, because right now they're causing more harm than good.
All right, here's one. You alluded to this earlier. We talked about how cities like New York, and I think at the time Cleveland were starting to talk about releasing jail inmates to prevent the spread of the virus. Initially, this was supposed to be nonviolent criminals. This was the rationale that I had read and explained at the time in episode, I think it was 212 or 213, one or the other, was given to the press. The rationale was that it was to keep people who typically jails are transitional spaces. You have people coming in and out. They may come in just for a short time. They're given a date for a court hearing. They're sent back out, and what they might be doing is bringing the virus into the jail population, or they might come in and get it while they're sitting in a holding cell and then take it back out and spread it around. And the idea was to prevent that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out that your initial reaction to this was exactly right. And mine was wrong.
The guy that goes out there and commits murder the day after he releases, I'm willing to bet that he wasn't sitting in jail for unpaid parking tickets.
Well, it turns out that after promising this was only going to be nonviolent criminals, very quickly it made it all criminals.
Yeah, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, because this is the same group of politicians that want to give inmates the right to vote. I mean, we're not just talking about convicted felons that have been set free and have paid their due to society, their debt to society. They want to let people who are presently serving time for heinous crimes and allow them to vote. So it shouldn't surprise us that they want to let them also go out into the rest of society. If they're responsible enough to vote, why can't they be responsible enough to live outside the barbed wire walls, the barbed wire fences of a prison?
And in New York, a new report released by the New York Post reported that 3% of inmates released by by Mayor DeBozo have committed new crimes, to which the mayor responded, "I think it's unconscionable, just on a human level, that folks that we've shown mercy, and this is what some of them have done. But it's just a small number of people." In other words, no biggie, just a few people.
He was shocked. He was shocked that felons that they let free from jail would suddenly go out and offend again.
That we were nice to them. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they be nice after we let them out?
That's like the kid on the playground at school who gave the school bully a candy bar, is suddenly surprised that the bully is punching him in the face again. This falls into the play stupid games, win stupid prizes category of life, I think.
I suspect de Blasio was one of those kids who got wedgies like daily from the bullies on the playground. He seems like a complete putz. And tell this to say, it's only a small number of people who are doing this. Tell that to the victims, you moron. This is to blow this off like this is no big deal, because it's not many people doing it. And I guess, if only a handful of people are getting murdered by the people you let out on the streets, compared to the number of people who are dying from COVID-19, I guess that's not such a big number. But to the people who are the victims, it hurts. It means a lot. And you've allowed it to happen. And you blow it off like this. This isn't leadership. This is government.
It's cowardice. Yes. It reminds me very much so of those politicians who decry any enforcement of our immigration statutes. And when we give them the examples of those Americans who have been murdered by illegal immigrants, they say, well, it's just a very small percentage. It's you have to be an absolute heartless, pardon the language, but you have to be an absolute heartless bastard to think that way. That, oh, well, it's just a few, it's just a small percentage. It's a statistic that isn't, significant enough for me to really care at all, is what they're saying if you read between the lines.
Yes, exactly. All right. We had a good laugh with the story out of San Francisco in episode 213. So let's revisit what's happening in San Francisco, shall we?
Sure. Watch out for needles and feces while you're at it.
Well, I found an interesting article that I thought I would share from Yahoo News. Social distancing measures are finally pushing San Francisco to house its homeless, something it's been unable to do for years. Well, guess what they're doing? They're going to be converting empty hotels, the ones that nobody is using because nobody can travel. They're going to convert those into homeless shelters.
Oh. So now, well, there's an upside to that, I guess. Instead of crapping on the sidewalk, they'll be crapping in the hotel hallways instead.
Yeah. I found this sentence interesting. City officials have declined to release the hotel's names to avoid violating privacy laws and stigmatizing the properties. Why would it stigmatize the properties to let people know which hotels were turned into homeless shelters?
You think maybe a person might want to avoid staying at a hotel if, they think that it's a likelihood that some homeless person has taken a dump on the mattress that they plan on sleeping on that night?
You're paying $500 a night for a place that 2 weeks ago Johnny crapped in the corner over in and was shooting up meth.
I'm curious to know. I haven't seen the article at all, but does the article at all specify whether or not these hotels that they did this willingly, or was this forced upon them by the city?
It does not say.
Because I would guess, and unless the city said, we're going to pay you for our homeless to sleep in your hotel, even then, if I ran a hotel, I wouldn't want to take the risk. How many mattresses are going to have to be thrown out because they are going to be urine stained after this is over? And I'm not in any way trying to denigrate the homeless, because I have known people in my life who were homeless due to no fault of their own, and these were decent, hardworking people who wouldn't even dream of defecating in public or urinating on someone's front lawn or anything like that.
Right.
There are people.
Those are not the people we're talking about.
Yes. We're talking about the people who willingly choose to live their life not caring one bit for how their actions affect others.
Right.
So I just want to make that clear. I don't want anybody to think that I am bashing on those who, due to no fault of their own, find themselves in a very difficult situation in life. I'm speaking of those who, because of drug abuse, because of mental health issues, and even those who suffer from mental health issues and are homeless because of that, that's a failing of society, in particular local governments, where they, rather than deal with those who are destitute and have mental health problems, they simply allow them to sleep on the streets where they're not getting help.
I'm going to try to put the best construction on this. Let's assume that they don't use eminent domain and they don't force these hotels to bend to their will, and they compensate the hotels for using their rooms. To me, this sounds like a good thing, right?
Yes.
This is we want to get, because there's, like we talked about in episode 213, there's simply no way to socially distance in a cardboard box.
Right. Yeah.
So
I'm willing to take off my cynic hat for a moment and look at this seriously.
Yeah. So if the city compensates the hotel, so you're helping a local business who has been damaged by this shut down, and you're getting these people who are destitute and in danger of contracting and spreading the virus and getting them into a situation where they can socially distance and they can be cleaned up and they can have access to clean water and the ability to shower and have sanitation, then this, I think, is a good policy.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree. Where I see a very significant danger in this is that in California, they and I don't know if it varies from a jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in many places they have squatters' rights, where if a squatter is living on your property, that it is very difficult to evict them. And so what happens when this is all over and these hotels want to get these homeless out of their hotels so that they can open back up for business?
Yeah.
I see I mean, yes, it's good to provide a solution here, but I see a very significant problem for those hotel chains and the owners of those properties when this is all over with.
Yeah, and that was my next point was, okay, what happens when all of the lockdowns, the executive orders go away and we feel like we've got this thing under control and everything gets back to some semblance of normal, and now the hotel wants the rooms back? What do they do now?
Yeah.
We just and not even considering, I didn't even consider the squatters' rights thing. Irregardless of that, do we just kick these people right back out on the street? What happens then?
Maybe this is what's needed for these cities and states to take a serious look at the homelessness issues that they have. Within California, this problem is one that has been decades in the making. And it started with the closure of the state-run mental health hospitals, where you had those people who, and obviously due to no fault of their own, but because of a very significant mental health issue, could not take care of themselves. And the state took care of those people.
Right.
And yet you have California, where they want to give every benefit they possibly can to illegal immigrants. They no longer, because they have misdirected their resources to people who should not be receiving the tax dollars from those hardworking citizens of that state who have been paying their taxes, because they have misallocated funds where they should not be going. They no longer have the funds to take care of these people. They closed down these hospitals. They made it so that a person had a legal right to sleep on the streets. They've had an outbreak of typhus on the streets of Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, they have approximately 60,000 homeless now living on the streets of Los Angeles. And this has been a catastrophe that is caused by bad public policy. This is the fault of the lawmakers, both at the local level and at the statewide level. It's time for them to learn how, or not to learn, but it's time for them to take a real hard look at how they can fix these problems, because let's face it, this is a humanitarian crisis. I never thought I'd speak of that way of the homeless problem in a particular place, but seeing how this has been so horribly mismanaged by those in authority within the state of California, I mean, these people are culpable. These governors and these mayors, they are culpable for the problems that have happened.
And that's an important point that I hadn't thought about. That's that sort of the misappropriation of resources and trying to curry favor with the immigrant community because you covet their votes, and you're not going to get the votes of the homeless because the homeless don't vote.
Right.
So you're not going to spend any money on...
Well, they do have ballot harvesting, so...
Well, there's that. But you can get that vote anyway, right? So you don't have to spend any money on that.
Right.
So they're not going to allocate any resources to try to get, or to that demographic, to the homeless, because they are not going to help keep them in power.
Right.
But if you spend those resources on illegal immigration in hopes that those people eventually vote for you, that's where, that the problem of homelessness comes down to covetousness. It comes down to the violation of the 9th and 10th commandments on the part of our politicians who want the power who covet the power that their office provides them. And the way to get it is by spending the money that they have access or they have control over on people who are not citizens, and as opposed to helping people who are their neighbors, they're citizens of their cities,
aside from the responsibility,
left sleeping on the sidewalks.
Yeah, aside from the responsibility of the government to allow the citizens to live in liberty, one of the greatest responsibilities of government is to make sure that those who cannot take care of themselves and for whom there is no one to provide care are provided for by the government. I'm not one who believes in creating welfare programs left and right, because so often those programs are used to buy votes one way or the other. But to take care of those who are incapable, due to no fault of their own, of providing for themselves and taking care of themselves, what greater responsibility could elected politicians have than that? Mm-hmm. To take this in a slightly different direction with the homelessness issue, that one of the problems that's rampant within the homeless community is that of substance abuse. So why aren't we taking the tax dollars that good, hardworking people are paying to the state and federal governments and using that money to get these people into programs where they go through a rehabilitation program where they're no longer using narcotics? We see so much waste of taxpayer dollars by the government, where that money could be doing so much good for those who are destitute.
Yep, very true. But all too often, our tax dollars are used to simply curry favor with those who can benefit our politicians politically. All right, I think that pretty well wraps it up. Hopefully we don't have to do a Coronapalooza Part 4. If we do, hopefully it's a celebration that all this crap is over with and we're back to life as normal.
Yes. That is my sincerest prayer, that we can get over this quickly.
Absolutely. All right, folks, if you have any comments or any questions about anything you heard here on the show, any complaints, we'd love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and respond to you on the air in a future episode. Next week will be another of our variety shows with tips and rants and pontifications from the entire cast. And then we've got some Q&A with the pastor the week after that. We've got some great questions for him. So don't miss that, coming up in episode 218 and 219. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or a review on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.